Hello and welcome to my oral presentation of the article Brexit has devastated Britain's international reputation and respect for its democracy. I have made this mind map and I'm gonna take you through it now. I'm gonna start off by talking about the context of this article. The article is written by Anne Applebaum, who is an American author and journalist for the Washington Post. She writes other stuff as well for other newspapers, but yeah, she is employed by the Washington Post. And she wrote this piece on March the 12th, 2019, shortly after Theresa May's Brexit deal got rejected. I'm gonna move swiftly on and talk about the medium. The medium is, as mentioned, the Washington Post. And the Washington Post is a left-leaning newspaper. When I say that, I mean it's a left-leaning newspaper by American standards, which means that in Denmark, this newspaper might not be particularly left-leaning, but America is a very right-oriented country. So it's a left-leaning newspaper by American standards, yeah. And the certain audience, like trying to pander to a certain kind of audience, I would say it's the well-informed democratic Americans. Obviously, Americans in general, you can say that's like the audience in general are Americans, but I kind of try to narrow it down because I don't think the average American, or at least not every American, follows Brexit closely, and you have to kind of be in the mix about Brexit, kind of have to have an idea about what's going on to understand this article. So I would say it's the well-informed democratic Americans who are the target audience. Yeah. I'm gonna move on again to her main arguments, which is up here. Yeah, she has a lot of arguments, but they are all kind of focused on this thing of this main argument, which is display of incompetence by the British government. Yeah, there's this quote I'm going to read kind of to get us started here. It says, "But before we get to that moment, it's worth pausing to reflect on the damage already done by the Brexit debacle. And I don't mean the harm to the economy. Far worse is the damage done to Britain's reputation, a serious international player, a competent negotiator of treaties, a reliable ally, a voice for sense in the world, and a representative democracy." Yeah, so she kind of touches on the economy very quickly because, of course, the economy has been suffering ever since Brexit started in 2016. But most importantly, she says, it's this damage, this insufferable damage that Brexit has caused to the British democracy. She talks about the history of Britain, which of course is a glorious history, and Britain has always been renowned as a very democratic country and a very political country as well. So to see Britain like kind of go down in flames over the last couple of years is kind of a shock, but it's kind of like the worst thing that could happen to Britain at this point. They wanted the opposite to happen with Brexit, and they kind of find themselves with this tricky situation right now. She also touches on another main argument here is the discouraging of the British people and the disbelief that has been spread around the country about the democracy. There's this quote I'm going to read quickly. It's the astonishing display of incompetence, the defeated votes, the confused explanations, the constant uncertainty will not increase the respect that people have for politics or politicians. It will only inspire them to vote or to become engaged in public life, or to respect those who do. This is an extremely important and very powerful quote here by Anne Applebaum. I think it kind of sums up the whole mentality around Brexit right now. Of course, the young voters or the old voters perhaps who have voted for Brexit or have voted against Brexit, they feel discouraged. They have lost the faith in the British democracy because the politicians simply can't get anything done. that is going to have a very harmful effect, not only right now but in the future as well, which I totally agree on. That's a strong argument, and that's really the takeaway from this article, I think, along with how the British history, there's a stain on the British history right now with Brexit. And yeah, the history is kind of amazing when it comes to democratic issues. So now it's just up in flames at the moment. I'm gonna move on to the intention of this article, which is down here. I would say she has a clear point of view here in this article. Of course, she wants to inform the readers about the repercussions of Brexit, which she does kind of. She summarizes some things. She says like how May's Brexit deal got rejected and so on, but it's not like an informative, objective article. She's very opinionated, and she wants to convince the reader that Brexit is a disaster, and right now she doesn't see any positives at all. So it's a very clear point of view, and I mean, persuade is kind of a negative word. I don't know if she wants to persuade the reader, but she wants to convince the reader that Brexit is really a bad thing right now. Then we're going to move on to the tone of the article, which is very interesting. She uses this because it's a very like charismatic tone. I think it's a very certain style of writing she uses here. It's an aggressive tone. It's definitely an aggressive tone, I would say. For example, it's aggressive, sarcastic, and humorous. We kind of like lump these three together with this quote about the drunken Italian, Poles, and Hungarians. She has this quote. I'm gonna say it now. We think our democracies are weak elsewhere in Europe, but even if you took a bunch of Italians, Poles, and Hungarians, kept them up all night and got them drunk, they still wouldn't come up with anything as disastrous as what we're seeing in the House of Commons. But this is not her saying it. It's a quote from one of her friends, a senior politician. But it's her opinion as well. She agrees, of course. That's why she's put it in this article, and it gives this kind of like, it's very, I think it's very like British like humor, very dry humor, and yeah, it kind of sums up how hilarious Brexit is, but also how tragic it is right now. She has, of course, it's very aggressive, sarcastic, and humorous tone, I thought. But that's the only example of sarcastic and humorous behavior. Overall, it's like she just slams the parliament, slams the British democracy in general, and how they haven't been able to get anything done. And it's quite easy to see why the tone is pessimistic. She even ends on a note saying, one of the reasons why many British voters chose to leave the European Union was because they distrusted European institutions. Of all the many costs of Brexit, this is one I did not foresee, that it could wind up damaging the nation's faith in its own institutions too. So that's the ending of the article, which, yeah, it leaves on a very sour note, and throughout she just kind of lists all the negatives. So she comes away with no positives about Brexit right now. So it's a very pessimistic tone and a very pessimistic view. Yeah, then we're going to talk about the modes of persuasion, also known as pathos, logos, and ethos. She makes use of a lot of pathos here. She does that to underline her opinion on Brexit, which I have already mentioned. Is, yeah, she thinks it kind of sucks right now. She also talks about British values, like Britain's great democratic history, and how they've been able to then to form alliances and negotiate treaties, and how they always have been a reliable voice and a reliable ally throughout the whole world and Europe as well. So it's kind of plays with like the traditional conservative British people who really like the nationalistic sense of being a British person, which Britain is obviously a very nationalistic country. So she kind of gets a lot of feelings involved in that way by talking about how great they have been before and how bad it is right now, the state of Britain's democracy. Logos, she uses logos to convince the reader, and logos is connected to arguments, and she has a lot of strong arguments. For example, the one I have already mentioned with the astonishing display of incompetence, the defeated votes, the confused explanations, the constant uncertainty, which this quote shows a very high intelligence. It's a very classic way of persuading or convincing, like just repeating the sentences, which I think is very smart use of logos. And in general, it's a very argumentatively based article, I would say. So she uses a lot of logos in that way. And Evers, yeah, you can say she's a well-known and respected journalist. She has even won a Pulitzer Prize, so she knows what she's talking about. But she is very opinionated, so you can't really trust her in that way, I guess, because she has a clear point of view. So it's not like an objective point of view. But she is a respected journalist, so you have to take her opinion seriously. I also thought the fact that she's American might like trigger some British people, and if they read this article and not take her seriously, because might think, what does an American know about the British society? Yeah, I'm gonna end this by talking about the state of Brexit right now. Yeah, and it's not Theresa May who's the Prime Minister anymore, it's Boris Johnson. And yeah, a couple of days ago, like 2 days ago, I think, yeah, on the 6th of November, the parliament is dissolved, which means, yeah, it's no longer there, and there's going to be a general election on the 12th of December. And this general election is very important, like many of the decisions have been throughout this whole debacle of Brexit, but it can go many ways after this election. Brexit can actually occur on the 31st of January on this existing deal that Boris Johnson has already put out, or it could result in a no-deal Brexit. Also, on the 31st of January, it could, of course, as we have seen a lot of times, just end in more and more renegotiation. It could lead to a referendum, or it could actually lead to the cancellation of Brexit, which it seemed unlikely, but I'm not sure how unlikely it is right now. But I mean, Corbyn also wants to get out of the European Union, so yeah, there's a lot of possibilities, and as there have been throughout these years, a lot of uncertainty still. But I can see I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to stop it here.